let's start.
So 3 ohms and then the
Sure.
Okay. Oh. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karva Vahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmad Acharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kama Rupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada. Karpanya Dosho Pahata Swabhavaha Prachami Tvam Dharma Samudha Chetaha Yashcheha Sanishchitam Bruhitan Me Shishyasteham Shadhi Mam Tvam Prapannam. Om Vang Me Manasi Pratishtita Mano Me Vachi Pratishthitam Avira Virma Edhi Vedasya Ma Anishtaha Shrutam Me Ma Prahasihi Anena Aditena Ahoratran Sandhadhami Ritam Vadishyami Satyam vadishyami tanmam avatu tad vaktaram avatu avatu mam avatu vaktaram avatu vaktaram. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bhadram Karnivihi Shunyame Devaha Bhadram Pashya Makshaviryajatraha Sthirairange Tushtuvagum Sastanuvihi Vashema Devahitam Yadayu Swastina Indro Vidashravaha Swastina Pusha Vishvavedaha Swastina Starksho Arishtanemihi Swastino Brihaspati Dadhatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Aham Vrishasya Reriva Kirti Prishtham Gireriva Urdhva Pavitro Vajidiva Swamritam Asmi Dravinagum Savarchasam Sumedha Amritokshitaha Iti Trishankur Vedanuvachanam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
I can see you've put in a lot of effort, Kakoli, in getting the pronunciations right and getting the intonations correct. It was fantastically done.
Yeah, the rhythm was very to the point.
Everything,
Very well done.
even I think even the rhythm, you maintain the same pace throughout, and that only happens if you've done a good amount of practice. So thank you for that, Seva. It was fantastic.
Okay. So typically in the class after this, we do the chapter 3 chanting. So what I would suggest is there is kind of like little point if I do the chanting constantly, because the idea of chanting is to get everyone to practice the chanting. And so I would suggest that we're going to skip chanting today. And from next class onwards, I would request volunteers to come forward. And even if you're not comfortable, that's totally fine. I'm happy to lead shloka by shloka, one by one. And I'm happy to think about how can we do this better, because I definitely want every one of us to participate and get this chapter 3 chanting right. Okay, there are 3 important chapters, as we've already said, that we all have to memorize: chapter 3, chapter 12, and chapter 15, right? So let's ideate on how to make this happen. And like in our physical classes, it was easy because everyone just would come in together and they would chant all the time, right? Every class we would all chant together. So it was much easier for us to go into that mode. But in this kind of a virtual format, that's not happening. So we need to figure out how to make this happen in a better way, right? So I do not want to do chanting in today's class, because I can just go on doing this and just complete it for the sake of completing it. But that's not the idea. That's not why we are doing this action anyway, right? The spirit behind it is just not being served. So today we'll skip the chanting. Let's go back to the drawing board and discuss how to actually benefit the people the way we want it to be benefit. Okay. And we will talk, let's not even start next class. Let's focus in next class on why it is important to chant the chapter, why it is important to memorize those, and what are the benefits of that. Okay. So we will focus on that. We will spend the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes just talking about that. And we will talk about, if people have any concerns, questions, we will address those. Okay. And let's take it from there. Okay. So for this class, we will directly go into the reading of the chapter. So we're on chapter 5. And in chapter 5, essentially, we're trying to understand, what does renunciation really mean, right? And renunciation mean for a karma yogi, because we are all karma yogis, and Gita has been written for karma yogi. Arjun was a karma yogi. He's the epitome of karma yogi. So what does sannyas or renunciation really mean for us? That is what is being expounded in much greater detail in this chapter. What we have understood, like if you look at shloka 7 and shloka 11, essentially we learned in shloka 7 and shloka 11, how does a karma yogi really do his actions and why they do it, right? So we understood that the way karma yogi, so for one step backwards, right? We have understood that both the paths lead to the same attainment, same goal. There is no difference in attainment between which state a karma yogi achieves versus what a sankhya yogi achieves, right? It's just that the path are very different. We also understood that the path is not something that we determine today. It isn't as if like today we wake up and decide, okay, I want to be a karma yogi or I want to be a sankhya yogi. This has already been decided when we were born, as per all the work we have done over the multitude of births that we have taken so far, right? So today, all of us, literally all of us who are sitting here, we are all karma yogis. There is no doubt about it, because of the circumstances in which we are born, the duties that are around us, right? The VVGP around us, it determines that we are all karma yogis. So there were a few important aspects of what should be the attitude of a karma yogi and how should he do his actions. So the 4 important aspects was, one was immaculate intellect. And how is immaculate intellect defined? Immaculate intellect is that intellect which is doing the action because it is a duty and not coveting the results of the action. And as such and this kind of an intellect is free from expectations of any kind of gain. Because it is free from expectations of any gain, it is free from any likes and dislikes. It is free from judgment. It is free from any kind of cynicism or fault finding, right? And so this kind of an intellect is considered immaculate. The second thing is the mind is subdued. The mind is subdued, meaning that the mind is not typically an unrestrained mind. What it does, it goes after likes and dislikes. That's the job of the mind. The seat of likes and dislikes sits in the mind. And a restrained, a subdued mind basically will take its orders from the intellect. So you will do an action based on its propriety and because of your duty, and not based on whether you like it or you don't like it, right? That is, in very simple way, what is a subdued mind. The third thing is restrained senses. So the senses are constantly engaging with the sense objects. That is their dharma. That's why they have been created in the first place, right? But restrained senses are important because you don't allow the senses to dictate the mind. So in general, when we live life, the way it typically works is that the senses are in control. The senses define where they want to go. Your eyes like something beautiful, and that's where the eyes stay. Your ears like to listen to something nice, that's where they stay. Your words, what come out of it is what you like to speak. Your tongue follows its own this thing. I want to eat this food, I do not want to eat this food, right? The senses dictate how you engage with the world. And through that, the senses then dictate the mind, and mind is constantly vacillating. This is something I like, I want more of it. This is an experience I don't like, I do not want. So you will do everything to avoid things that you don't like, and you will do everything to again and again experience what you like. And your intellect essentially becomes a slave of this mind. And the intellect will do everything to justify every action of yours. Why this is the right action, why that is the wrong action. So your intellect is now the slave, right? This is how we typically live life. And this is absolutely the opposite of how we should be living life. The way we should be living life is through the intellect. Intellect is not turned towards the mind, intellect is turned towards Bhagwanji. So when the intellect turns towards Bhagwanji, then it is basically now being dictated by the principles, the laws that have been set, the universal laws. And that then talks to the mind, and then mind then restrains the senses, which means practically what it would mean, I need to eat, right? So the mind and the intellect will define, you should eat this because this is good for your body. Eat this. You should be doing certain things because this is what is required, for all. And our sense objects will do those things, engage with the sense objects only to the extent that it is required, right? And then in Shloka 11, we understood that when a karma yogi behaves this way, then he becomes like a kamal, a lotus that grows in the muck, and still there is no smear of any dirt that touches. So it doesn't matter which VVGP we find ourselves in, which circumstance we find ourselves in, who we are associating ourselves with, or what is being required of us. None of that is going to come and touch us, just the way the lotus does not get touched by the muck that it grows in. And then if that be the case, then why and how does such a karma yogi perform any actions in the first place, right? He has already given up a sense of doership. That's what we understood very clearly. He has given up a sense of doership. So such a karma yogi uses his mind, his body, his senses, his intellect to do his duty, the actions, only as a way of self-purification. Everything is done with the aspect of self-purification. Every time we control our mind, every time we have a win over our likes and dislikes, over our natural sanskars, over our natural disposition, every one of those steps purifies us and takes us one step forward towards towards our divinity, towards revealing our divinity.
Moving away from animality.
Now, in shlokas 8, 9, and 13, conversely, we saw how does a Sankhya yogi approach this. So Sankhya yogi, as we have understood so far, he doesn't even have that sense of doership, right? like a Karma Yogi has a sense of doership, but he does it with a dedication to the Lord. But a Sankhya Yogi does not even have a sense of doership, right? So how does he behave? The way he does is that while performing any kind of act in this world, seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, speaking, letting go, acquiring, opening, closing of eyes, every single action he sees as just the play of the gunas. And he himself is completely detached. He is an observer because he identifies himself with the capital S self. Because he identifies himself as a capital S self, he views this body as just a tool. How does he view the body? As we read in Shloka 13, he views it as a city or a house of 9 openings. The 9 openings being the 2 eyes, the two nostrils, the 2 ears, your mouth, and 1 opening for urination, 1 opening for defecation. So there are 9 openings in this body, and he looks at himself as just a dweller in this abode, right? And then he says that everything is being done by this body through the play of the gunas. I have got nothing to do with it. He does not get involved. So how do you really understand what it means? It's easy to understand it with an analogy of the sun. The sun comes out and the sun powers everything that happens in this world through its energy. Similarly, capital S self provides energy to the 3 gunas. The moment those 3 gunas get activated by the energy, they start doing what their dharma is. The eyes will start seeing, the ears will start listening, right? All of that happens. But just like the sun is not judgmental. It does not create any impulsion on how its energy should be used. People are free to use its energy exactly the way they want it. The sun does not judge you for that. And it does not create any impact. There's no impact on the sun of how you use its energy and what you do with it. Similarly, capital S self also is not impacted by anything that the rest of the body does through its play of the gunas. That is how Sankhya Yogi lives his life. Very, very different, right? So that's what we have covered so far. And now we are going to see that if the gunas of the nature is what really activates this body, if this is really how the world works, then how come Karma Yogis start to think of themselves as the doer of the action? Where does that conceit of doership even arise from? That is the next question that we are going to answer.
Kakuli, she did the invocation.
Anupam, will you read the connection with Shlok 13, please?
Sorry, which chapter is it? I missed the last class.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. This is chapter 5.
What page number in it?
160. Oh, chapter 5. 160.
168 page. Chapter 5.
Just a second.
Okay, maybe you can read the next one. For now,
Okay.
shall we have Rita? Would you please read the connection for Shloka 13? Anupam, we'll have you read the next one after this time.
Yeah.
An important question now arises. The self is taken to be non-active, but all the functioning of the gunas of nature is activated by the energy of the self. The self is not the doer of any action, nor does it impel the senses of anything, but the senses function with the energy provided by the self. If it is so, why does a man regard himself to be the doer of action and hold himself responsible for their consequences? Explaining this, the Lord says,
Na kartatvam na karmani
Na kartatva na karmani
lokasya srajati prabhu
lokasya srajati prabhu
na karma phala sanyogam
na karma phal sanyogan
swabhavastu pravartate.
Svabhavostu pravartate.
Pravartate.
Pravartate. The Lord does not determine doership of men, nor does
Yes.
he formulate their actions and the relationship of the actions with their outcome. It is nature alone that functions.
I'll just quickly read through the word meanings.
Oh, yeah,
that we
sure,
spoke about,
sure.
yeah? Na is not. Kartatvam is the sense of doership. Karmani is the actions. Lokasya, in this world. Srajati is create or make. Prabhu, Prabhu is Lord. Na, again not. Karma phala sanyogam is the relationship of actions with their results. Swabhavastu is swabhav or the nature or the dharma or the law, the universal law. So that is the swabhav, the dharma. Pravartate is functions. You can go ahead and read, please.
Yeah. The Lord is unaffected by the doership of actions or their outcome. This is a very important shloka. Sometimes a man thinks that he has been placed in a rigmarole of situations demanding actions and performance of duties. But this shloka shows that the Lord has no connection with doership of action of men or outcome flowing therefrom. He says that it is nature that brings them about. The effect of motivated action of innumerable past lives lies stored in the mind of a man in the shape of predisposition sanskaras. These sanskaras give rise to multifarious desires which determine their duties. If impressions of wealth, property, family, acclaim, etc. gets imprinted on the mind, he becomes liable to duties conforming to these impressions. There is no direction given by the Lord in this connection. It is the gunas of nature that impel a person with corresponding actions. This is why the individual has a presumption of doing the doer. At the root of any such action lies the feeling of attachment to the outcome of the actions. A disciplined person, however, is either dissociated from the sense of being a doer of actions like a Sankhya yogi, or the conceit of being a doer is given up and the consequences dedicated to the Lord like a karma yogi.
So this is a lot that got packed in this particular shloka. There is a macro and there is a micro element to it, right? So macro element is, if you remember the Shrishti Chakra chart, right, where you had the senses, you had the Bhaya Karan, all the senses and how we perceive sense objects. Then you have the Antakaran, which is mind, body, ahankar, which is, mind, intellect, ahankar, mind, intellect, ego. And above that, you have the gunas, right? And above gunas, you have the capital S self. So capital S self, which is the individualized self or the soul, that powers the entire system. But it's exactly that. It's just the power for the entire system. What creates all the energy to do the work, what creates all the desire to do things in this world is driven by the gunas. And gunas, as we know, is made up of Sat, Raj, and Tam, right? Satvik, Rajas, and Tamas. Each one of us, based on our own previous lives, whatever we've chased, whatever unfulfilled desires, whatever consequences of actions that we have to pay forward for, that is what we get attracted to in this life, because that's the combination of the gunas that exist within each of us. And that's what this shloka is trying to highlight, that each one of us is made up of these particular gunas in different combinations with different proportions, which trigger our sanskars, our natural predispositions, stuff that we've probably chased for many lifetimes. We will have that same perception in this life, and we'll keep falling into this trap of life and death and suffering and happiness and the duality till you step away from it and start operating from principle.
I think this is a very important thing that he has just mentioned, right? We have to remember, just, if we die tomorrow, right? Dying does not mean that everything in this life is going to change. It doesn't change that at all, because then if that is the case, then that's the easiest way to moksha, right? Everybody go like kill yourself and we're there, like we'll just go merge with the Lord. No, that doesn't happen at all. If we die, nothing changes except that this body, the physical body, is not there. Everything else, the baggage that we have created through our actions, our likes, our dislikes, and actions meaning not just physical action. Right now we know that action is actually at the thought level. That is the only focus that we have to have, not the physical action. It doesn't matter what we do in physical action, right? So all of that actually gets carried over, and then it has to be cleansed out before we move forward. That's very, very important to know. So what have we learned in this? The important question was, why does a man have a concept of doership? Why does he associate himself as a doer of the actions? And why does he hold himself responsible for those consequences? This is actually, it seems very simple, but it's an extremely deep, answer here. The answer is that it is our sanskars, our attachment to the outcome that binds us to them, nothing else. It is our attachment. We attach ourselves to it. Going back to what we had discussed in last class, we have to understand how powerful the beings that we are. We constantly give away our power to others by constantly blaming the rest of the world and other people or circumstances or events, by saying, oh, I am what I am today because of this person or because of the circumstance, whatever.
And
every time we do that, we give away our power. So it is, the situation unfortunately is like that of, we've given this example before, that of a monkey. A monkey finds, how do you catch a monkey, right? One of the easier ways of catching a monkey is to keep nuts, stuff that he likes, in a very small surahi, right? A surahi is basically this vessel with a very thin neck,
narrow opening,
right? Very narrow opening, very thin neck. So he puts his hand in to take the peanuts. He takes up the peanuts, and after that, now he cannot take his hand out, because now his hand is full of, is a fist. He's unable to take it out. And he will just sit there trying to open this out. And that's where you go and catch a monkey. This is practically how a monkey is typically caught. Now, what got him caught? It is not peanuts. It is not the guy who set up that trap. What got him caught was the fact that he is unable to let go. All he has to do is open his arms and take his hand out, and he's free. Right? We are exactly like that monkey. We hold on to things and then say, hey, I got caught because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. No, it is up to you to let this go and be free. We choose not to let go. This is very, very important to remember. Very important to remember. And to make to just make you understand, like, the people just talk about it, and even the next shloka is going to talk about it.
Lena, how do you get down to that blame game that you're talking? We are so used to, accustomed to putting the blame on the universe. Anything goes wrong, rather than putting it in yourself. So how do you fix this?
So I was going to talk about this slightly later. I think the next shlok that Tuhna is referring to, which is, what's the difference in a person operating from the blame game and the person operating from the principles? The difference is knowledge. One is operating out of ignorance because they don't have access to the principles. They don't have access to the right knowledge from which to operate. And the other are people who have the knowledge and are practicing it. And for you to bridge that gap, it's just about sadhana. It's just about constant focus on practice of scriptures, of reading it, of understanding the principles, because you can do it every Saturday, but you're doing it for 1 hour, 1.5 hours every week, but the rest of the 6.5 days, you're in sansar. So, and it's so glamorous and it's so glittery and it's so it's so inviting and it's so exciting and it's so stimulating the entire world, that it's easy for us to forget these principles. It's easy for us to go back to our sanskaras, because that's how we've operated.
Yeah, and
And-
sanskars, we must remember, are just plain habits.
Yeah.
It's nothing but habits. Habits that have been formed over a long period of time through our own continued actions. The only thing that breaks an old habit is to first become aware that this is a bad habit that I want to break out of. Second, once that awareness comes in, second, we find out what is the new habit that I want to take on. Because the world does not write like a vacuum, right? So you can't just simply say, for example, if I want to stop having tea or coffee, just simply saying I will not have tea or coffee doesn't help. I understand I need to break the habit of drinking too much caffeine. I have to find something else to replace it. Earlier, I would always start with this. Now, can I replace it with, say, warm water? So finding that other thing that will replace this habit, and then practice. And it will always start with small things, right? As with everything else, like if we have to do a full marathon, it will start with that first step, and it will be hard work. That first 1 kilometer that we run is very tough. But if we keep practicing and practicing and practicing over a period of time, and everyone will take their own time to develop from that, I have never run before, to a full marathon, people will take different times. And what will determine how fast somebody reaches there is how much practice the person does and how much effort they put into their diet, their practice, their sleep, resting, all those things will eventually get us to running that full marathon. So there is no shortcut, unfortunately. The only way is to practice and swadhyay every day. We read this Gita on Saturday. All of us remember these principles, right? Now, if we can keep doing swadhyay on a daily basis, every day these principles will be the first things that we remind ourselves of. Then every time, slowly we will reach a point, where after we have done something that we're not happy about, it will, come up as like, oh, I did not do something right. This is not the type of principle I want to live by. Slowly, with constant practice, we will reach a point where we'll start to realize it during the action. Oh, I'm doing it. I'm not happy about it, but we'll still find ourselves not being able to stop. Then we will reach a point where that awareness will shift to before the action happens. It's a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, and it's also connecting back to Shloka 11, right? Everything that is happening to us is an opportunity for our own self-purification. In hindsight, we all understand this. We all know that every event that has happened, no matter how unfavorable it was for our benefit.
Yeah,
It was-
unfavorable from a material point of view, right? We all understand.
Yeah, so it was always for our own growth, our own uddhar, right? So we understand this in hindsight. It's about bringing this principle in the foresight and in the present, that no matter how unfavorable it is, the situation, it is actually an opportunity for our self-purification, controlling that instinct or impulse that we need to control. Otherwise, that's our animality, or controlling our attachment to something in this world, because that also is just creating bondage.
And then the way to also remember, like to understand Shloka 14, and I'll give this example, which will also improve our understanding of the next Shloka that we will read. It's important to remember, I think we've said this several times before, it's always good to remind ourselves again and again. Nature is not cruel, and nor is nature merciful. Okay, nature, it just does justice. There are laws that are laid out there. It's like when you go out to play Monopoly, right? Monopoly has been created by its creator. There are laws and rules that have been set. This is how you have to play the game. Once that has been done, you go in to play that game. You are constantly making decisions, right? The entire thing hasn't been said exactly how each player will play the game, right? Every one of us has a free will, and we have choices that we have to constantly make. You come on a certain site. Do you want to buy it? Do you not want to buy it? At what point do you want to, like, what do you want to pay for? All of those questions, right? This is a very simplistic example, but basically we have a free choice while playing the game. And when we make those choices, depending on the rules of the game, we get rewarded or we get punished, right? It is, and there is nobody judging you. So God is like that. He's the creator of this game. He's created the laws and left it to us. Now you go play the game. If you will eat too much, this is the impact it will have on your body. If you do not, if you eat this, this is the impact. If you eat that, this is the impact. Very clearly understood and written down. Ultimately, the result is up to you. Your actions will determine how your body will behave afterwards, right? So you cannot blame anybody for this. You cannot, and nature is not going to say, oh, this person is really good, and so I must, give him some benefit of doubt. It doesn't matter. This person is very wealthy, I must give him something more. No, it doesn't matter.
So
Right?
it's almost easy to actually visualize it as a game, that we all are, like Bhagwanji's made us in his form, right? We all are a little part of him in the
Yes.
individualized
Made
soul,
in his image.
right?
Yeah.
Made in his image. And he sent us, like Tuhina said, to this game. And as we play this game, if we get engaged in it, we always will have a bank balance. We're always collecting things for ourselves, or we always like have attachment towards things. And that bank balance just keeps following in the form of our antakaran, right? Our ego and our mind and our intellect.
And that
The only way
antakaran,
to exit is for that bank balance to become zero.
correct. And that antakaran is what creates the VVGP around us. Just to remind ourselves, VVGP is what? Vyakti, Vastu, Ghatna, Paristhiti, right? People that we find ourselves associating with, the objects that attract us or that create an impression in us. Ghatna is an event and Paristhiti are the circumstances, right? Our antakaran creates this outside of us. So when we look at our VVGP, right, we have to remember, Lord is not rewarding or punishing us through these VVGPs. We are the only ones who are manifesting everything outside of us. That is the power we have. The moment we realize how powerful we are and we are manifesting everything outside of us, then what is the first thing to do? If there is something outside of us that we don't like, who are we going to go back and complain to? Ourselves. What are we going to change? We have to look inside of us and change that something that needs to be changed inside of us, and not go after symptoms that we see outside of us. Outside world is a mirror of what is going on inside of us. So as through the Gita principles, as karma yogis, we always have to do internal work, not external work. We have to work constantly only and only on ourselves. As we work on ourselves, as is inside, so is outside. So if we are finding that we are associating, or we are, finding people around us getting angry with us, we have to go back and check, where is the anger residing inside me that I am seeing this being manifested in my environment? And go and fix that inside of us first. I have to stop being the angry person, and that manifestation will stop outside of me. As is inside, so is outside. If I turn up for meetings and other people are keeping me waiting, I have to ask myself, where else have I got other people to wait? Where have I wasted other people's time? Could be in completely different context. Okay, it isn't a one-on-one. Oh, I wasted this guy's time in this particular meeting, so now my next office meeting I will. No, it is never a one-on-one thing, right? In fact, as we understand, this world is like every action is like a seed. Every seed will bear very many fruits. So it's a one-to-many consequences that get created. We do one good deed, it will create many good results. We do one bad deed, it will create many bad results for us to live through. The magnification is huge in this world, right? The world is a magnifier of everything we do, we feel, we see inside of ourselves.
Yeah. And it's also just the other thing to stress about in the shloka is God does not make us do these things in this world. We have a way of justifying it that, oh, Bhagwan ji ke liye kar rahe hain, ye kar rahe hain, wo kar rahe hain. But in reality, we're only doing it for one reason, which is our own self-purification, because we know that that's the only way to attain eternal bliss, self-realization. That's what we're moving towards. And just to add on to what Tuhina was saying earlier, we actually in the world operate slightly from the opposite lens, which is we become a judge to others and a lawyer to ourselves, which means we will justify everything we do or do not do, because that's how we operate. That's how we operate as lawyers, and we will judge everyone else on the high lofty principles that we think people should live by or we should live by. And Gita is saying, do the opposite. Become a lawyer for others to understand where they are coming from and why they have to operate from that particular lens, and be a judge to yourself. What am I doing or not doing to uphold the principles? Anupama.
There was something else that I wanted to say, but it's okay. Let's move on. Let's move on.
Connection. Does the Lord avail of the consequences of dedicated actions done by a person practicing either of the disciplines? The Lord replies to this question.
Na datte kasyachit papam.
Na datte kasyachit papam.
Na chaiva sukritam vibhu.
Na chaiva sukritam vibhu.
Ajnanena vratam jnanam.
Ajnanenam vritam jnanam.
Tena muhyanti jantavaha.
Tena muhanti jantava.
Yeah, muhyanti. There's that her and then ya. Muhyanti.
Muhyanti janantava.
Jantavaha. Yeah. Na datte means not accept, does not accept. Kasya chit papam, basically it means any kind of bad deeds or any kind of sins. Na is not. Chaiv, certainly. Sukritam, good deeds, good actions. Vibhuhu is the omnipresent God. Ajnane is ignorance. Avratam is covered by, is a covering. Avratam is covering. Jnanam is knowledge. Ten, by that. Muhyanti is deluded. Mohit ho jata hai, gets attached and gets deluded. Jantavaha is any jantu, any living entities.
Can you repeat omnipresent, please, Tuhina? Omnipresent, the word for omnipresent.
Vibhuhu. Vibhu is the omnipresent God.
Okay.
So Vibhu is just another way we refer to God. So in the meaning of Vibhu is generally the omnipresent God, essentially.
The omnipresent Supreme does not receive the virtuous acts or the unvirtuous acts of anyone, but the awareness, none, is shrouded in ignorance which deludes the beings. Virtuous or unvirtuous acts not received by the Lord. The correct import of this shloka can be understood with the help of a simile. During the rainy season, a river gets flooded as water pours into it. On the other hand, hundreds of rivers keep pouring their waters into the ocean every moment, but its level remains unaffected. All the water poured into the ocean disappears in its limitless expanse. Similarly, the outcome of all the acts done by a yogi disappears in the infinite awareness of the omnipresent Lord. Dedication benefits only those who practice the disciplines, because it rids them of the bondage of these actions. What happens to those who covet the outcome of their actions and are therefore in bondage? Their awareness is shrouded in ignorance. As such, they are deprived of the awareness of the Supreme. They remain unaware of the importance of actions for achievement of self-realization. Conceiving themselves to be doers of action, and coveting their outcome, they remain deluded with their ignorance and remain bound to the chain of outcome and actions.
Yeah, so two parts here. So the first part is again the analogy here is quite clear. There is another analogy through which you can understand this is of course cricket. Right? So you have an umpire in cricket. Now, what does the umpire do? He gives judgment based on how the player performs. Right now,
According to the rules of the game.
according to the rules of the game. And if the player hit a ball and he got out, he's out. The umpire will rule his judgment and the player has to follow it. Right? Now, the player cannot blame the umpire for it. And for the umpire, there is no consequence from the match that he is experiencing. But he is an active person that is powering the entire event. Without an umpire, there is no game. Right? Similarly here, that's just another analogy that Bhagwanji is there. But what you are experiencing in this world is a consequence of the game of being in samsara. It doesn't affect him at all. But those rules, those consequences, our own karmas that we have to experience, we have to go through that as part of life. The second part of the shloka, he says that those individuals who think everything is happening because of them and their actions, that's where, of course, ego comes in. Those people are operating from ignorance. And those people would be the people who would, in the shloka is saying, are completely deluded and are on the treadmill where they're constantly chasing one desire after the other, and that seems to be their only focus. Right.
Another important thing here is dedication benefits only those who practice the disciplines, right? So God is not there collecting our virtuous or unvirtuous acts, right? He's not going to benefit out of what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. The only person who's going to benefit is the person who does those actions, right? As such, every VVGP that we see around us and every moment that we are able to do certain action, the difference between an ignorant and a realized person or a karma yogi would be that an ignorant person is constantly in the state of like, why do I have to do this? Why me? Why should I be made to do this? Why not someone else? Right? They are constantly in that state of mind. Whether it is, if it is something that they are being made to do, if it is a laborious work, why me? Why can't someone else do this? Or if they are at the end of if they are receiving certain benefit, they're very elated that, oh, I did all of these things, so I got this promotion, I got this bonus, I made this house, I have this name and fame, right? Versus a karma yogi who looks at everything as an opportunity of seva. If I have been given this opportunity to do something, it is like I should be grateful that I am able to do this for my company, for my family, for my friends, for my community. Every time there is an opportunity for me to do something is an opportunity of seva for me, where I stand to benefit alone. I am the only one who benefits. I'm the one who benefits the most. Yes, there may be some external benefits to others. I made the food, my child will benefit, my husband will benefit, the family will benefit, they'll get to eat some food, right? But who's the biggest beneficiary? These are very small, tuch, very petty benefits that other people get. I, as a person who has cooked the food based on how, in which bhav, with what purpose I have cooked the food, I have much more to gain out of it if I do it with the right bhav. So that is very important. An example that Abhinav gave long time ago, right? And you can see it in so many different forms. Bhagwanji doesn't need us, right? He doesn't need his work to be done by us, right? So an example that Abhinav gave, which I thought was fantastic, was, when that Ramayana was happening and Ramji wanted the Sena to go and fight Ravan. So he had asked, and this entire Bandar Sena was there with him, and they
Sugriva.
went, and Sugriva went and asked him, like he was afraid, right? He was like, I'm not sure if we are capable of fighting this war. Do we have the right skill set capabilities to be able to do this? And he went and asked Bhagwanji, like, you are God yourself. Why do you need us to fight? You can go and fight this yourself. You should be able to win over Ravan by yourself. And what did Bhagwanji say? That yes, I can go and do this like this. The reason he's doing this is, this entire thing is his Leela. It is a game he's playing, not for himself, but to create opportunities for others to be able to participate in the game, to cleanse themselves, to learn, to be able to go forward in their understanding and reach and be able to express their divinity through their own cleansing. This is everything that we see around us is our personal antakaran cleansing mechanism.
So the choice is never about doing the action, because the action will always happen. The choice is always about how we do the action, whether we do it with the right bhav and intention. If we operate from fear or if we operate from faith, right? That's honestly the only role of free will and choice. Baki sab is gunas, nature, and that will happen regardless of us, right? The other example that I had shared, right? Like I take Vedanta to school typically at 8 a.m. every day. If one day I don't do it for whatever reason, I can guarantee he'll still reach school by 8:15, maybe 8:40 latest. That action will take place. But I would have lost that one opportunity of doing my duty. And that's how we should be seeing things.
And then Abhinav touched upon like a few minutes ago on the concept of ego. The ego arises and all, right? So I just want to talk about that a little bit more in a slightly different way than what we have talked about before. So identity or the ego, we've talked about what is the role of ego? The ego serves as an identification mechanism.
Like a barcode.
Right? It's like a barcode. And that is important for all of us to have. We have explored it in different ways. So today I just wanted to bring out a new way of looking at identity, ego. We've said a lot of times, the immaculate intellect that we started off with. Immaculate intellect is one that faces God, that takes its what do you call it, like orders or so from the God. And what does that mean? It takes its orders from the universal principles and not from mind. If it is turned towards the mind, then it is taking orders from the mind and it is justifying all likes and dislikes that we have. How do you turn the intellect towards God or towards mind? How do you do that? Intellect, and this is where identity comes into play, ego comes into play. Intellect will serve your ego no matter what. Intellect will serve your ego, which means your identity. So what determines which way intellect is turned is determined by what is your ego, what is your identity. So in olden times, before children were given the first syllable of education, the first thing they were supposed to do before the starting of, Vidya Rambham, there was a ritual which was called Vidya Rambham. In that ritual, the first thing that was done was their identity was established. And how was that identity established? Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahma. You create your identity as not a limited small identity. I'm a mom, I'm a banker, I'm a CEO, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife.
Yeah,
these are all very limited identities.
These
are roles, they are not identities.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, what happens over a period of time, we become identified with the roles we perform and we become so identified with them that if that role is taken away from us, it devastates us. Right? People get devastated when their children leave homes. Oh my God, like, what will I do? I was like the mother or father of this child and now he's no longer looking back, or like, I don't have that role to play in this child's life any longer. They'll get devastated. A person loses his job, completely devastated. right? Who am I any longer? Who am I? I've gone through that identity crisis myself, so I can vouch for it, right? I've gone through that. You ask a person, who are you? They will define themselves through the roles they perform, right? So it is very important to remember these rituals were extremely powerful rituals. The moment we have limiting identities, in that moment, we have created boundaries. As soon as there are boundaries, then it becomes mine and yours. What is behind this boundary? What is outside of this boundary? And that is going to create clashes. Necessarily, it will create clashes, right? The only way to eliminate clashes is for us to assume a universal identity. And that is the way to increase our consciousness beyond ourselves, beyond our families, beyond our alma mater or our communities. So, aham brahmasmi. Extremely important to get. This is the way to increase our universal consciousness. And the moment our identity is that of universal consciousness, that's when your intellect becomes immaculate, because then you're not competing with your colleague. Why did he get the bonus and I didn't? It doesn't matter. He got the bonus or you got the bonus. That's the result. It's a petty result. It will follow. Your actions and your results will be your own, right? God is the bank balance holder here. He will never give what is due to you to another person. That can never happen. You will get what you deserve, always. So that's not something for us to worry about. We only need to worry about today's action and how we are doing it. With what bhav we are doing it. So with that, I think we can move ahead.
Yeah.
Sanchita, will you read with us?
The Lord now speaks of those who know the importance of the self.
Jnanena tu tad jnanam
Jnanena tu tadyanam
yesham nashitam atmanaha
yesham nashitam atmanaha
tesham aditya vajnanam
tesham aditya vajnanam
prakashayati tatparam.
prakashayati tatparam.
Jnanen is by knowledge. Tu, but. Tat is that. Ajnanam, ignorance. So tat jnanam is tat plus ajnanam. Yesham, whose. Nashitam, destroyed. Atmanaha, of the self. Tesham, theirs. Aditya is like the sun. So Aditya is actually sun. Vajjnanam is Jnanam is awareness, knowledge and awareness. Prakashayati, illuminates. Tat param, that supreme entity. Tat param, that supreme entity.
To them whose ignorance is destroyed by the awareness of the self, that awareness, like the sun, reveals the transcendental self.
So
Realizing
here there are two things, two examples to keep in mind as we read this. So the first is this, that when it's night, no matter how many stars, moon or street lights or floodlights you have, it doesn't dispel darkness. It maybe gives you a little bit of glimpse of what the world is. But the moment the sun rises, it dispels everything. And that's the same thing with ignorance and knowledge. When you start reading the scriptures and when you start having when you start having faith, the sun starts rising brightly and shining through you, through your antakaran. Because your antakaran is where the mela is. That's where the blockage is. When you start working on self-purification, the sunlight, the divinity starts reflecting through you. And that's when that happens, it destroys all illusion that we live with or we experience because of the gunas, right? The second example here to think of is movie theater. When you go and watch a movie in a movie theater, the movie is it's real. You can feel all the emotions of that character. You're fully moved. You can be in tears. You could feel the same anger, the thrill, the fear, all of those things, right? But the moment the movie is switched off, you remember, oh, this is just a movie, right?
Same as dream, right?
Same thing as dream, right?
And the
So
moment you wake up,
so you realize it's not real, although it felt so real. And you experienced everything as if it's real. You were moved by everything that you were watching. What was real in the movie theater? The screen on which the movie was played. So what is real within us? It is the self through which everything is powered. And we'll realize that if we work on our antakaran, and we consciously, actually subconsciously also know of this, because we're attracted to all the things which are the property of our soul, which is Sat Chit Anand, right? Which is truth, bliss, and permanence. Yeah, we've discussed that in the past.
and this is also something for us to, like, if you think about these examples, especially that of a dream, right? You understand you understand why Gita constantly gives us the assurance that the moment we have self-realization, it doesn't matter how many years, how many births we have taken, and how many sins we have accumulated. All of that are extinguished in a moment. Like, you have self-realization right now. That's it. It doesn't matter how many, how many piles. You don't have to work through every single action, the sakam action or the desire oriented action that we have done, right? Because the moment you wake up from a dream, pop, everything is over. Everything is over. There are no consequences for any actions you may have done in the dream any longer, because you have woken up. Similarly, it doesn't matter how many years a room may have been in the darkness, whether it's been for one day or whether it's been for 1,000 years. The moment the light is switched on, in that moment, it takes exactly that 1 second for the entire darkness to get dispelled. It isn't as if, like, oh, this room was in darkness only for one day, so quickly the light will come on. But if it's 1,000 years, then the light will go slowly. No, it doesn't work that way, right? The light comes on, the darkness gets dispelled like this. So this is where we should know that, that whole idea of this journey, the fact that we can reach the self-realization, that goal, it isn't that loftier goal that we cannot reach it in this lifetime. And we shouldn't give ourselves that leeway either. I will make like 5 steps forward and, let's come back in our next life. We should be grateful that we have the guidance of Gita in this life. Next life, we don't know where we will be.
One is Gita. Second is the grateful that we have a body of a human form, right?
Yeah.
Next life, there's no guarantee of.
It's not easy to get human life.
Yeah, where our next sanskar or where our next experience will take us.
Yeah.
Yeah, please continue reading.
Realization of the transcendental self by self-awareness. For those Sankhya yogis or Karma yogis whose ignorance is dispelled by consciousness of the self, the transcendental self stands realized automatically. Thereafter, they pass beyond the reach of any delusion. Of the two, the Sankhya yogi is completely free from the sense of being a doer of actions, but a Karma yogi, though having the sense of being a doer, is free from the conceit of being a doer, and so perfectly dissociated from the outcome of actions, performs them only as an agent of the Lord.
So again, it becomes, we've talked about this earlier, right? That you can attain self-realization, but that doesn't mean you don't have duty to do. That doesn't mean you will not play your roles. You will still go to office. You will still be your mother. You'll still be a son. You'll still be a sibling. That duty doesn't disappear because you've attained self-realization. All of that will continue. It's just that we will be operating from a place where we'll be radiating divinity. rather than doing it out of expectation or outcome, like, dislike. You're doing it purely out of the principles.
And I'm going to read the sentence and make sure that, we understand what this really means, right? Thereafter, they pass beyond the reach of any delusion. Okay, they have now understood what is self-realization. They understand what is real, what is unreal, right? After that, they are past any delusion. That is correct, but it does not mean that they will stop doing their swadhyaya. So this, I think in one class, there was a question around, a Sankhya yogi coming in, and then, they will still take a few years to realize and all. And we had talked about it, that even if a Sankhya yogi comes back, and Sankhya yogis do come back in this world, right? They just to serve the world. Even after they take a few years, because the whole experience of being born in this world, right? This world is corrupted with, I wouldn't say corrupted, but it is Maya.
Glamorous.
It is Maya. The moment you come in, that entire act of coming in will create some smear on you. It's like you get into a Kalkota. If you get into a coal mine, you cannot come out without any smudge on you. Okay. So what is the process? You go into a coal mine. First of all, you drape yourself up properly so that you do not get smudged. And when you come out of it, you have to clean yourself. You have to take a bath. You have to, keep cleaning yourself. So how do they clean themselves? They are constantly doing their swadhyaya. And even in like Bhagavatam, I think I told one time before, even in Bhagavatam, there are umpteen number of stories. When you read, you will realize that these amazing realized souls who are incarnations of the Lord, they will come in as karma yogis. These have been kings who have done all kinds. They have lived as a karma yogi all their life. They have been administrators, they have been parents, they have done everything that has been required of them. And still at the end of their duties, they have gone on to do a lot of penance to cleanse themselves of the baggage they have accumulated in this world. Which means that if they at that level of self-realization have to pay penance, have to cleanse themselves, what to speak of us? Can we spend a day without doing swadhyaya? Can we do a day without reminding ourselves of the principles with which we should live life? Very easy for us to get blown away by the current of the river. Unless this river has got very fast current, right? Unless we are grounded and tethered to something real constantly through our swadhyaya, through our scriptures, through our nam jap, through our whatever actions and things we do to remind ourselves of what principles we want to stand by and live by, we are going to get swept away. Next moment will come, you will be quick to rise to anger. Next something will come and you will find the feelings of jealousy or anger or envy come up, or upset come up, or blame come up, right? And there's nothing wrong with it, right? We don't have to blame ourselves for that either. Be kind to yourself, but action is important. You can't be kind to yourself by saying, I will not do this action. I cannot do my swadhyaya. I cannot do my nam jap because, too busy. If we are too busy to do these things, we have to remember we are like a pencil that is constantly writing and writing and writing. At some point of time, the nib is going to give away. These actions are a way of sharpening the pencil. Without sharpening the pencil, there is a time when we will stop writing properly. Yeah.
Who's reading? Sanchita.
Okay, so we've finished this reading, right? Vijay, will you read with us now?
The Lord now explains the various links in the chain of discipline of direct perception, Jnana Yoga.
So in this one, we have a very long sentence. It is basically composed of 4 words. Okay, so we'll just say those 4 words separately, right? Tad buddhaya tadatmanaha.
Tad buddhaya tadatmanaha.
Tannishtha tatparayanaha.
Tannishta tatparayanaha.
Gacchantya punaravrattim.
Gacchanya pururavrittam.
Jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha.
Jnana nirdhuta kalmishaha.
So tat buddhaya, in all the in the first sentence of 4 words, you all start with tat. Tat means that. Here, that basically means the self-realization, or that supreme entity, the transcendental entity, the truth. Okay, the rit that we talk about, the eternal truth. Okay, tat buddhaya is the intellect that is completely absorbed in that. Tadatmanaha means a mind that is absorbed in that. Tannishtaha is the self that is only identified with that. That meaning the supreme identity. And tatparayanaha, the person who is parayan means on the way, or is like has reached, right? Parayan ho gaya. So the person who is constantly sitting in that, or is constantly reposed in that transcendental reality. Gacchantya, प्राप्त होते हैं, attain. Punaravrattim, that param gati from which there is no return. Jnana nirdhut kalmashaha. Kalmasha is pap, sin, right? So Jnana nirdhut kalmasha would mean Jnana ke dwara paap rahit hokar. For those whose all sins are burnt by the knowledge. Okay.
Beautiful shloka. Thank you so much. With intellect totally absorbed in that transcendental reality, the mind always contemplating that. The self identified with that and being totally reposed in that. That state is attained from where there is no return to the phenomenal existence, and in which all blemishes of impurities are burnt out by realization.
So, so before we read the rest, so the opposite of that is this, and I think aage jaake I don't remember which chapter now. This, the way it's defined is this. How do you define this?
Idam.
Anything idam. Idam and?
Idam is this.
And that is?
I forgot the word.
I forgot the word. So this is anything that you can point to. So they're basically anything in sansar, anything in the world. That is this. That is
what is not this. Basically.
What is powering the this. Right?
It's
so
not of this is that.
Yeah. So out here, that here, and throughout the Gita, that always refers to the transcendental self.
The capital S self.
Yeah. Because that is an experience. That is something we cannot touch, we cannot feel. And we've discussed this in previous classes. Love is not something you can define. Love is not something we can easily, is same for every single person. Expression of love is not the same by two brothers to a mother. It's all different. It's an experience though. And it's similar to that, which is why it's not defined that way. Please continue.
Attainment of supreme state by total identification. In the discipline of Jnana Yoga, Sankhya Yoga, the yogi strives to have the firm conviction that the world is a product of illusion and is unreal like a dream. Along with this, such yogi holds conviction to that only the supreme consciousness has real existence. By constant practice of discipline, the following states are attained. The mental state. The mind at all times remains convinced of the fact that only reality is existence of Supreme Self, and appearance perceived by the senses are non-existent like a dream. The mental climate of our times creates number of obstacles in achieving this conviction. But in overcoming those obstacles, the conviction grows that whatever is being perceived is only a play of illusion, Maya, and is unreal as deemed. With a conviction, the yogi experience infinite bliss because gradually the distinction between what is favorable and what is unfavorable fades away. This is what means by contemplation of that by the mind.
Yeah, go on.
You have something to say.
So this entire shloka, they're basically identifying or defining how we would experience that if it was reposed in our mind and in our antakaran. So the first element, which is mental state, is one where your mind, so your monkey mind that we talk about, is fully attached to Bhagwanji. And that's why we do Nam Jap, right? So instead of this constant chatter that's created non-stop, you replace that constant chatter with Bhagwanji. And that just becomes a very strong reminder and a belief that everything that happens is
For the best.
everything that happens in this world is unreal.
Hmm.
And what is real is that.
Hmm.
So you're constantly focused on that. This is the hardest for all of us to do because our mind is so filled with the glamour of the world, and it has so much connections with the world, and we all have an overdeveloped logical sense of how we believe things to be, that we're not able to step back and actually observe how things are.
So that's where we're going to read the next one, right?
Yeah.
The
So
determination
that's
of
when the
intellect.
intellect will come in.
So here it says that gradually the distinction between what is favorable and unfavorable fades away. It's very important to stress upon it again. As we go on to this journey of Gita, right? The concept of favorable and unfavorable has to dramatically change. We are constantly defining things as favorable or unfavorable based only on one thing. Did I want it or did I not want it? And only in a material sense of the word. Something that I wanted, if it happens, it is favorable. If I didn't want it and it happens, it is unfavorable. That's the only definition we have, right? Once you get onto path of Gita, it is a very privileged path to eternal bliss. But you lose the privilege of complaining. Because there's nothing that is actually, you will start to realize that there's nothing that is actually unfavorable in this material world. Whatever feels unfavorable in the material world, eventually your mind will start to understand, your intellect will start to determine it's actually in your best interest. You may or may not understand it in that moment, but there is something out there that is preventing you from going and collapsing. Let me give you an example to fully appreciate what that means. We are all constantly trying to achieve happiness and avoid pain, right? Pain avoidance is a very big factor in what we do or don't do. Now, is pain bad? If you think of it from that avoidance and material world perspective, it would seem like, yeah, pain is a bad thing and we must avoid it at all costs. In reality, pain is extremely important. It is our protective mechanism. It is what keeps us together. The reason is that, okay, so if we did not experience pain, a lot of us would not even have, unfortunately, a lot of us do not have the intellect of even keeping or preserving ourselves. If you did not experience pain, a lot of us would be cutting ourselves away from everywhere. I'll cut my nose away to like make it seem like in a certain way. I'll cut my face, I'll cut my thighs, I'll cut my body. We'll actually cut ourselves away. If I did not experience pain, when a truck comes from behind, the reason I step away is because I want to avoid pain of being hit by the truck. Not because I have an egalitarian point of view. Most of us don't. Pain makes sure that we step away for self-preservation. If we did not experience pain, we would just stand, okay, come, let the truck come. Let's see what happens. So pain is a very important mechanism to protect us. Now, this is physical pain. Let's come to mental pain or emotional pain. When we experience pain, mental or emotional pain, it basically means that something is not right here. And we will do everything to get ourselves out of that situation, which is typically an unhealthy situation for us. Unfortunately, some of us will continue to stay in that position, in that space. I do not like this job, but I'll continue to stay in that job and keep justifying ourselves, right? So a lot of us do that, but ultimately pain's job is to protect us, to show us that this is not good for you. Step away. Okay, so what may seem unfavorable in the material world is actually for our end benefit in every way. And a realized person starts to see this, starts to have a vision and understanding beyond what seems apparent. What is this? Beyond what is this? Yeah.
And one more thing, like in the way the charity and so on, most of the people does, if they gone through something really struggling and they want to uplift others, most of the times, like it is not who's having wealthy, rich, or that kind of thing, who's not without any pain. Typically, who has gone through that cycle, those are the ones who come forward quickly to help others out also. That is one other observation. So pain, how you take it, how you change it, it's going to be this thing. What I have experienced is wherever kind of support, whenever we do any kind of charity related work, most of them already they themselves would have gone through some kind of a problem or a ruckus. That's when they are going to like quickly come over to help for others than
Absolutely.
who cannot really understand or empathize the situation. So that is the other part that I wanted to mention also.
Very powerful example. That's actually true. Most of the NGOs that are going to protect or are going to help us move forward in our fight against cancer would typically be funded by somebody who has who's been a cancer survivor, right? So that's absolutely true. Exactly. And that's a very positive way of transforming our VVGP into a force of good. And acquiring a seva attitude, a seva bhav, being able to appreciate that whatever happens to us is happening to propel us forward in a positive manner towards our divinity. Very, very nice example. Thank you.
The determination of intellect by establishing equanimity of mind in perception of what is favorable and what is unfavorable. The intellect becomes capable of holding firm conviction in existence of an all-embracing reality. As the objects of the phenomenal world start losing their separate identities and start being viewed only as manifestations of one reality, the intellect gets absorbed in meditation of the self. In this state of intellect, the reality of self bursts forth, illuminating the intellect in its full blaze. This is what meant by absorption of intellect in that.
So here, determination of intellect, establishing equanimity in the mind. We read this in chapter 2, right? Samatvam yog uchyate. Equanimity is the yoga. Equanimity is the connection to the Lord. And yoga, and when we are in the yoga, what happens? All our actions become extremely efficient. We've read that, right? Now, intellect is what helps us hold on to the truth when things start to go wrong. That you will have feelings. Senses are created to interact with the sense objects. So if you put your hand in fire, it is going to burn. That is a dharma of the fire, to burn, and the skin is going to come back and tell you, dude, like, take your hand out, right? So if you reach the self-realization, it isn't as if like you will not feel that pain or that you will not feel the heat. You will feel that. What you do with it is what changes, right? So you will continue to experience pain, you will feel disappointment, you'll feel sad, but will you act from it or not is what will change. I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling angry. Can I recognize that? that yes, I'm feeling this negative emotions, but this is not what I want to do. Let me try and find out what has happened here. Let me try and see the other person's point of view, and then let me calm down and then act from a space of who I want to be, who I need to be, right? That is the job of intellect. So the intellect starts to determine that this is how you should act and not react to a situation.
Identification of the self. As the mind and intellect get absorbed in supreme self, all barriers between that and individual self start falling down. So long as the mind and the intellect do not get identified with self, the feeling remains in the yogi of contemplation of the self. By the mind being engaged in the process of contemplation and supreme self as the object of contemplation. The three are known as trade of contemplator, contemplation, and contemplated.
So let's take this a little. Hey Vijay. Yeah. So let's take this a little slower, right?
Yes.
So we're talking about the Triputi or the triad. Just three things: mind, intellect, and soul, or capital S, self. Okay, these are three distinct bodies within us, and we need all three to experience divinity. So the first one is the intellect, the starting point, the thing that chooses to look for the answer, look for divinity. How does it do it? By contemplation, the mind. The intellect logically cannot do it. Logically, it's not a plus minus type scenario. It is through contemplation and reflection. And that requires the mind. That requires the intellect to use the mind to contemplate and reflect upon the contemplator, which is the capital S, self. And these are the three distinct bodies and their interplay. So I think in our class sometime a few months ago, the question always came up as, what is the role of the mind then, right? Like if it's such a, what's the purpose? This is it. Without the mind, we would not be able to contemplate on divinity.
Just to take that conversation a little forward, if I have to ask you, what kind of intellect would you like to have? What kind of intellect is preferred, blunt or sharp? What would the answer be?
Or sharp.
Sharp, right? Nobody asks for blunt intellect, sharp. So the way we define intellect, right, we always define it as sharp. Sharp like a knife. The job of intellect is to slice and dice. Intellect is our determinative faculty. Very important determinative faculty, which allows us to operate in this world and live in this world. So intellect will help us discern, slice, dice, logically think things forward. But because of its very nature of cutting, right, it can never help us unite with the Lord, with the rest of the world. Its job is to cut. It is an extremely important thing to be able to cut and slice and dice between what is real and what is unreal. But the ability to move beyond that, it takes us to a certain level. Intellect will take us to a certain level. After that, you have to rein your mind free. Mind is the only tool, and it is the most powerful tool that we have, the most powerful tool, much more powerful than your intellect, which will allow us to contemplate, like Abhinav said, on the reality. And what is very important, we read this in chapter 2 and then again in chapter 3, but a lot in chapter 2. How do we define that? We cannot define it. So how did we go about it? We went about it with the way of exclusion, what it is not. That is the only way to understand it, because our intellect is extremely limited. It cannot contemplate what it cannot contemplate, what it cannot understand. So we started off by saying what it is not. And this is where intellect helps us. It keeps telling us, okay, look at myself. Is this body mine? If I'm calling it mine, then I cannot be this body. I have to be separate from this body because it is mine. Just like I say, this cup is mine, this book is mine, right? So this house is mine. So I am not the house. I am not the book. I am not the cup. I am someone who owns it. So this body is mine. So I am not the body. Similarly, these are my emotions, my thoughts. So I'm not the mind. I am not the thoughts. I am not the emotions. We have to keep saying, okay, what am I not? Once we have eliminated everything that I am not, that which remains is the Rit, the eternal truth. So once we have used our intellect to discern what we are not, after that we have to let our mind free. And that mind will make that leap to understand what that real truth is. And it can only do it when we are able to leave the boundaries. We have to shut out the boundaries of our limited identities, the boundaries created by memory. Memory creates boundaries. So we have to be able to leave these behind us to be able to go beyond. Let's move forward.
But as contemplation gets intensified into meditation, both mind and intellect get completely merged in divinity. The triad then converges into a unity, and the total existence of yogi is unified with divinity. This is culminating point of the discipline, and in the state of yogi firmly reposes in the one reality.
So here, only one sentence before we move forward. We have, when we read about different types of yagyas, right? We had read that who is Brahman? The ladle is the Brahman in a Havan, right? He is the Ahuti that is given to the Havan. He is also the fire which accepts that thing. He is also the person who is making that Havan, right? He's everything. He's all encompassing. There's nothing separate from him. And that is being by saying that contemplation and contemplated, they are all going to merge into one Brahman. That is what is being said here. Now, the part about meditation, we'll skip it for now, because in the next chapter, which is going to be all about meditation, we will get much more deeper into this on how to meditate and how to help ourselves reach that state of being able to discern. Yeah? Move forward.
Total repose. The identification of individual self with universal self turns the total existence of yogi into divinity. In the functioning of the mind, the intellect, the vitality, and the senses, there is a complete identification with play of supreme divinity. This merger of individual's existence with supreme existence leads to the state of yogi's total repose. On attaining this state, volitation of the yogi in the all action is burnt to ashes. Having no existence separate from divinity, the question of virtuous or unvirtuous act does not arise. Even the effects of actions done previously vanish like disappearance of activities in the dream along with the dream. This is what meant by burning out of all blemishes or impurities as mentioned in the sloka.
Absolutely. So this is, I think, stuff that we've discussed in
Just
various
covered
ways.
also.
Yeah.
Just covered as well.
So we'll close today's class here.
Kakoli, is she's
Yeah. Let's do the closing.
Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, सर्वे शान्तु निरामया सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्युर्मा अमृतं गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ पूर्णमद पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णम् उच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णम् आदाय पूर्णम् एव अविष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ